I often point out that Xi Jinping also operates within his own information bubble, heavily influenced by the National Bureau of Statistics. For example, the Bureau recently published the results of the third National Time Use Survey. According to the findings, Chinese people now spend less than 3.5 hours per day on paid work. Compared to the previous survey in 2018, working hours have decreased, while time spent on sleeping, enjoying leisure activities, and even exercise has increased. Looking at these survey results, I can imagine many Chinese people feeling furious. The Bureau of Statistics is essentially telling Xi Jinping that there is still more room to squeeze the human resource mines. With his mindset after reading this report, he's probably written off any idea of focusing on public welfare. Instead, he's likely thinking those complaints are just isolated cases. Chinese people are too idle, spending too much time online, and falling for foreign influence. True to form, Xi recently visited Brazil and handed out more money without hesitation. He probably even thinks that ordinary Chinese citizens can grit their teeth and bear the 60% U.S. tariff without issue. I suspect he's genuinely being misled by the people at the Bureau of Statistics, and the similar flawed narratives are pervasive in China. Take, for example, the widespread belief that China won the first U.S. China trade war in 2018. Many think that if they won the first round, they are bound to win the second. But when did China ever truly win a trade war? Perhaps these nationalists should take a hard look at the current state of the U.S. and compare it to China's situation today. Claiming victory under these conditions is simply absurd, a clear product of being indoctrinated by the flawed narratives propagated domestically. Hi, I'm Dong Sean. Welcome to Dig Into China, where we explore China in depth to uncover rare insights. In today's video, I'll be debunking several misleading narratives from within China that I've recently came across. Let's begin with the survey from the Bureau of Statistics. According to their own data, they surveyed over 100,000 people, asking them to record their activities every 15 minutes on both weekdays and weekends. The findings? On average, Chinese people work less than 3.5 hours a day, and even shorter workday than in the 2018 survey. However, there is a problem with the sample. It includes groups like minors and retirees, whose weekly working hours are 0. If these groups make up too large a portion of the sample, it will skew the results and lower the overall average working hours. The biggest change compared to the previous survey is the average time spent online. The latest results show that the Chinese people now spend an average of 5 hours and 37 minutes online every day, nearly 3 hours more than in 2018. This seems to subtly hint to Xi Jinping that more and more people in China are lying flat, spending so much time online that it's naturally reducing their work hours. I imagine policies like the internet usage certification and the restrictions on minors playing games came from Xi Jinping reading this report and having a light bulb moment. The Bureau of Statistics is really frustrating. They are all well aware that China's economy is in trouble. The average person is working a 996 hours every day from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, and there's no more energy to squeeze out. But to ease the leader's conscience, allowing him to continue exploiting the people without guilt while spending money internationally, challenging the U.S. and setting up factories in Europe, they are fabricating a report that falsely claims the people are too idle. Their actions are truly despicable. Next, let's debunk a few misleading narratives coming from within China. The first false narrative is that China won the first U.S. trade war. The trade war began in 2018 during Trump's presidency. But when Biden took office, he largely continued Trump's trade restrictions on China. So to be precise, the first trade war has been ongoing for 6 years. Next, let's look at which country is more dependent on trade between China and the U.S. The answer is obvious. It's China. Exports a primary source of foreign exchange for China and one of the key engines of its economic growth. In contrast, the US has traditionally run a trade deficit and has a consumption-driven economy. Therefore, in a trade war, China undoubtedly bears more pressure. Third, another way to judge this is by looking at the past 6 years. We've seen Huawei, once thriving, nearly lose its export business under US restrictions, and now it can only profit by catering to domestic patriotic consumers. However, we haven't seen any major US importers go out of business due to losing access to Chinese goods. When Americans stop buying Huawei phones, they still have Apple and Samsung as alternatives, so the impact is minimal. In fact, much of Huawei's market share has been absorbed by Samsung. So who is really bearing the loss here? Fourth, many nationalists like to point to China's import and export data released by customs to boast that despite US sanctions, exports are still on the rise. However, this growth is highly exaggerated. If you look at China's share of global manufacturing, it was 29% in 2018, and today, 6 years later, it's only 30%, a mere 1% increase over the entire period. Before 2018, China's manufacturing share grew by more than 1% each year on average. So it's evident that China's manufacturing sector has stagnated since 2018. Of course, you might argue that some industries have been moved to Southeast Asia. But this raises an interesting question. If China truly doesn't care about the US trade war, why move factories to Southeast Asia to avoid sanctions? Why not just let Americans not be able to buy Chinese goods at all? Furthermore, the relocation of factories has caused a significant increase in domestic unemployment and weak consumption. The state of China's domestic economy is evident. If you believe things are improving, then please show us the pay stubs. Let's take a look at the US side. The biggest consequence of the trade war with China for the US is inflation. The inability to purchase cheap Chinese goods could indeed push inflation higher. However, many people in China mistakenly blame the high inflation in the US over the past few years on the inability to buy inexpensive Chinese products. This is completely wrong. The U.S. Department of Commerce considered removing the tariffs imposed on China by Trump, but in the end, Biden decided to continue the trade sanctions. Why? Because data shows that the tariffs Trump imposed had less than 1% impact on the US CPI. The main reason for the high inflation in the US in recent years was the pandemic. During that time, the government took on massive debt to provide economic relief, and the supply chains were disrupted. The fundamental cause of inflation is excessive money printing, while the impact of tariffs is minimal. So when the little pinks claim China won the trade war with the US, where exactly did China win? Was it in the rise of violent crime and social instability, or in the higher unemployment rate? Little pinks can share their income changes. How many of them actually got a raise? Speaking of income, there is another misconception. I've noticed that many people confuse assets with income. What do I mean by that? For instance, a family in a big city where the couple earns 20,000 yuan a month owns a house worth 5 million yuan and pays a 10,000 yuan monthly mortgage. In many people's narrative, this family is considered wealthy because the house alone is valued at 5 million yuan. However, if we look at this family's actual spending power, their monthly income after paying the mortgage is just 10,000 yuan. With only 10,000 yuan to support a small family, their purchasing power in a big city is relatively weak. Therefore, owning a 5 million yuan house doesn't mean they have the same spending capacity as a family with 5 million yuan in disposable income. In today's China, with widespread declines in property prices, this type of family is definitely facing a consumption downgrade because people's expectations have shifted. For example, 10 years ago, you could buy a house in a major city for 2 million yuan. The price kept rising, and by the following year, that house was worth 3 million yuan. At that time, even if you were earning just 10,000 yuan a month, you would still be inclined to spend it all because your home was increasing in value, giving you the confidence to upgrade your lifestyle. This confidence came from the appreciation of your assets. But now with a 5 million yuan house, you anticipate it may only be worth 4 million yuan next year, while your salary has been stagnant for years and there's even the threat of layoffs. In this situation, the 10,000 yuan mortgage payment becomes a heavy burden, and it's only natural that you begin to scale back your consumption. The third misconception is that some people believe domestic companies won't go bankrupt even if they lose export orders because they can still turn to domestic sales. However, the reality is that companies involved in foreign trade generally don't want to focus on the domestic market. Although foreign businessmen have developed some bad habits from doing business with Chinese people over the years, foreign trade is still much easier compared to the domestic business environment. In domestic business, you may need to entertain clients every night of the week to secure orders. But when dealing with foreign importers, they typically only visit once or twice a year, and the requests for favor or perks are rare. Secondly, the competition in the domestic market is fierce. It doesn't matter how good the quality of your products is, the market demands low-cost, cheap items. Business opportunities are mainly in lower-tier markets due to the trend of consumption downgrade. However, foreign buyers prioritize quality, and in the export market, you can stand out by offering superior products. Chinese-made goods are generally of better quality than those from Southeast Asian countries, and this difference is something we notice even when shopping abroad. Third, doing business domestically often means you might not get paid on time or could be dragged down by issues like triangular debt. However, when dealing with foreign buyers, payment problems are much less likely. As for profits, although Chinese goods sold abroad are priced much lower than their retail price in foreign markets, around 10% of the retail price, foreign trade profits are still higher than domestic sales. The biggest advantage is the lower hidden costs. In foreign trade, there are fewer expenses related to personal connections or other consumable efforts. In domestic trade, however, these costs can be much more unpredictable and burdensome. Anyone familiar with doing business in China will understand that. For many foreign trade companies, transitioning to domestic sales isn't a viable option. If they lose their overseas orders, most will likely close down. So when some claim that the trade war hasn't had a major impact on China, let's not focus on the ruler's perspective. Instead, let's consider the perspective of everyday people. Are businesses in your area struggling? Has your salary been cut? Are you worried about losing your job tomorrow? These are the issues that matter to us. If you always adopt the ruler's viewpoint, just remember that when millions and millions of Chinese were starving, Mao Zedong still enjoyed his red braised pork. Could he really complain about his own difficulties? I want to advise young people in China that unless you come from an official family, you should aim to work for foreign companies. These companies actually follow labor laws, offer a more relaxed work environment, and don't require the grueling 9-9-6 schedule, working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. If you do have to work overtime, you will be compensated for it, and your boss is less likely to belittle you. The work culture in foreign companies is generally more comfortable, allowing you to feel more respected and valued. Even if they eventually pull out of China, they will provide proper severance. The influencers on Weibo who constantly stir up nationalist sentiment to attack foreign companies are causing harm to the Chinese workforce. By pushing these companies out, they're making workers dependent on domestic firms where exploitation is rampant. Over the past few years, many foreign companies have already pulled out, which is truly unfortunate. Foreign companies were one of the last places where Chinese workers could maintain some dignity. Those driving foreign investment out are directly harming the working class and are a genuine threat to their livelihood. Thank you so much for watching. If you find this video helpful, please like it, drop a comment below, and hit the subscribe button right here. It really helps YouTube suggest my videos to others. I'll be back with more content soon. Until then, be well.